And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Tigers!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No! Splash Brothers? Yeah.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
The playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
That's the primary. So we're going to jump right on in here. And a few other things that we're going to talk about this week. One of the main injuries that's going to affect a lot of people is Jimmy G went down. Now, some people are speculating that that's not going to affect the team that much. I, on the other hand, do not think that. I think it's going to limit their offense. I think it will probably help Christian McCaffrey, but probably will not help Brandon Ayuk or George Kittle that much. But I do think it'll help McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel as they run more trick plays to get them more involved and kind of save the offense for the season. Also, the White Knight, Mike White, did not save the game for them this week, but he did save their offense. Their offense seems to be a lot more productive, and specifically their fantasy football players their role players seem to be a lot more productive with Mike White at the helm. So that's good news. If you have any Jets players in your lineup or in your leagues that you're relying on, as long as they got Mike White in there, it seems like they're going to be more productive than if they end up going back to Zach Wilson. And then, as I alluded to earlier on, coming into the podcast, the Saints fail us again. That is correct. They were up 16-3 in the fourth quarter, and Tom Brady scored 2 touchdowns to come back and win and beat us 17-16 on the road in Tampa Bay, pretty much eliminating our hopes at the playoffs period. Our division's so terrible that if we would have won, we would have been, I believe it would have been 5-8 and actually had a chance to pull out the division and make the playoffs. But now, after losing this game to Tampa Bay, we're pretty much going to be eliminated. I'm not 100% if we're completely eliminated, but for the most part. And it definitely looked like our team had almost succeeded in its hopes. But neither here nor there. We got a lot of fantasy stuff to cover. We're going to move on into injuries. Joe Mixon ended up getting ruled out with a concussion, which just speaks to his history and how cautious the NFL is. He had come back to practice but never been cleared from the concussion protocol, which is why I told you to hang on to Samaje Perine. So if you did hold on to Samaje Perine, then you're rewarded because he actually had a pretty decent week this past week. This week, probably a pretty good chance that Joe Mixon gets cleared and gets to come back this week. But I would still hang on to Samaje Perine just in case. But Joe Mixon, keep an eye on his practice schedule. He's going to practice, but he's got to clear that protocol before he can come back. And then next, probably one of the most significant injuries, which I told you there was a fair amount, is going to be Lamar Jackson. Ended up with a knee sprain. They are calling him week to week, which is something you never want to hear as a fantasy football player, because week to week typically means you're going to miss at least 1 week, if not more than one. And as cautious as Baltimore is with their star players, definitely he's already almost been ruled out this week by Harbaugh. Not completely, but calling him week to week, I mean, that pretty much does it right there. But hopefully if you have if you have Lamar Jackson, you're going to want to pick up one of these quarterbacks I'm going to talk about here in just a little bit to stream until he comes back. But they definitely said it's not season ending, but keep an eye on his practice regimen and, updates coming on throughout the week and next week. Leonard Fournette actually came back last night and looked okay in his return last night on Monday Night Football. So he is back and off the injury report. Another guy that has been having somewhat of a breakout year in his rookie season, Kenneth Walker, went down with an ankle injury, had an MRI, has not been ruled out, which is good because that means the MRI was not significant, but they have not released the results or the details of that. They're calling him day-to-day, which probably means it's a low ankle sprain. They have not given specifics, which I've been trying to keep an eye on to see if there's been an update or not, but there has not been. So keep an eye on Kenneth Walker. That offense has been really productive for running backs. So if he is out, DJ Dallas actually came out with a high ankle issue, aka per Pete Carroll, which is aka high ankle sprain. So we're going to talk about their possible replacement later on in the pod. And then, so keep an eye on Kenneth Walker's schedule. If he does play, then he is definitely, going to be a must start because if he gives it a go, then he's going to be somebody you want in your lineup this week. Tua went down with an ankle injury. They said he could have returned, but he did not because they did not need him to come back for this game and is expected to start next week. Mike Williams was ruled out with no surprise, re-injured that high ankle sprain. No update or practice schedule laid out for him at this point. So keep an eye if you got Mike Williams, if he can return this week. Cortland Sutton went down early in the first half with a hamstring injury and was ruled out fairly quick. That's never good. And we all know hamstring injuries, soft tissue injuries in general can be very tedious. And given that Denver's season is pretty much not going anywhere this year, I would be very surprised if he plays at all. And not to mention, you probably weren't playing him more than a flex. Maybe you had to play him at wide receiver too because you drafted him so high and you didn't have anybody else to play. But if it was me, I would pick up one of these other guys we talk about and play them over Cortland Sutton this week regardless. But Cortland Sutton down with a hamstring injury. Jacoby Myers was dealing with a shoulder injury, ended up playing, and then ended up getting injured at the end of the game and ruled out with a head injury. There's been no update. I'm sure it just says head injury. It doesn't say concussion, but I'm sure if there was a head injury involved, he's going to be in the concussion protocol. And we all know that that's pretty much means he's going to miss a week. But keep an eye on his practice schedule and updates on news on him. And then David Njoku came back, had a decent week. Everybody was looking forward to seeing him and Deshaun Watson on the field playing together. And early on in the game, he injured his knee and was ruled out for the rest of the game. There's been no update, but given his injury history, it did not look good. I seen the replay. They haven't said anything else about it, but we'll just have to wait and see what they say on when he if he practices this week or not. So keep an eye on that. And moving on to Brandon Cooks. I did not have high expectations for him after he kind of held out and wanted to get traded and did not. So I was shocked that he actually came back to play, but then he was ruled out of his game against Cleveland with a calf injury. He doesn't want to play. This was his out if he really was injured or not. It could have been him saving face because he doesn't want to play. So he's I hate to say AKA faking an injury. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Either way, left the game with a calf injury. Their season's going nowhere. I would be shocked if he doesn't milk this and sit out the rest of the year. I hate it for Brandon Cooks owners, but if you have him and are out there, go pick up Nico Collins. He's going to be the number one. It's going to be a tough matchup for him this week, but he will be the number one in that offense going forward. Moving on, Hayden Hurst also left early in his game. for Cincinnati with a calf injury. There's been no update. Tight end is thin, another tight end injury. He went down injured, and he was ruled out. So be looking to pick up some of these tight ends we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Moving on, Rondell Moore, no update. He's coming off a bye, had a groin injury. Be watching if you are needing help at wide receiver. He is definitely somebody I'd be looking out for. So look for his practice, see if he's out there on the waiver wire, if somebody dropped him on his bye and him being injured. But Rondell Moore, keep an eye for his update for practice this week for coming back. Michael Carter had that low ankle sprain. We kind of thought he might play, but ended up getting ruled out. Zonovan Knight actually looked pretty good, and Ty Johnson in his stead. There's been no update. Watch for his practice schedule coming up. If he comes back, I do expect it to be more of a committee than him just taking over the backfield again. And then last but certainly not least, Jimmy G broke a couple bones in his foot, required surgery. He is done for the year. So lots of key injuries on people in the, not specific playmakers on your fantasy team, but guys that were filling roles for you that, are not so in very thin positions that are not so easily replaced at this time of the year. But we're going to see if we can give you some good options, and hopefully they'll work out for you, can push you on into the fantasy playoffs and maybe lead you to a championship. So we're going to jump right on into our top waiver targets after week 13 that are owned in less than 60% of ESPN leagues. Number one at the running back position, which we always lead off with, is going to be James Cook. And that's going to be my number one overall, just for the sheer fact of his talent, his expectations coming out of college into Buffalo's offensive friendly system. He looks like he is almost at least 50-50, if not he's 60 and Devin Singletary's 40 in their offense at running back. He's getting a majority of the pass catching targets, and out of the backfield, he's getting a lot of the key plays for Buffalo. So he's owned in, I think it was right at 30% of leagues. And so I like James Cook a lot coming into this week, especially if he takes over that backfield. Of course, that's going to be key. So because that offense moves the ball well, and I think Josh Allen's injury with his elbow is affecting him more than people realize, and he's checking the ball down a lot more than he normally does. Number two running back for me this week, it's going to be Tony Jones Jr. for Seattle, sheerly because the Seattle's running backs depleted. Travis Homer was ruled out with a knee sprain before the game. Kenneth Walker has a chance to play, and if he does, I think that Tony Jones Jr. will be irrelevant. But if Kenneth Walker's out, I don't think Dallas, and it's a solid matchup against Carolina. They're an offense that leans on their running backs heavily, and Tony Jones Jr. might be the last man standing if Kenneth Walker and DJ Dallas are ruled out. So that's my number two pickup at running back this week. Number three is going to be Cam Akers. Honestly, Sean McVay really pulled the wool over our eyes, playing Kyron Williams as much as he did and kind of talking him up, and then all of a sudden just pulls the rug out from under us and plays Cam Akers 73% of the snaps and Kyron Williams the leftovers. Honestly, I think they're showcasing Cam Akers to trade him to try to get what they can, and he's been fairly productive, had a decent week. This is a plus matchup at home against a Las Vegas defense that is not that good against the run, and he's going to get, looks like, about 3/4 of the volume in the offense. So he's somebody that I think you could do worse even on a poor offense. Is going to get the volume, could be a solid RB2 for you. Number 4 for me is still going to be Zonovan Knight if Michael Carter gets ruled out, even though it's a tough matchup at Buffalo. But Zonovan Knight looked good, and he's getting a lot of the good carries and targets in the backfield for the New York Jets offense that's scoring the ball. So he seems to be the primary beneficiary with Mike Carter out. If Mike Carter comes back, I do feel like it's going to be a 3-headed monster or 3-headed running back committee that you probably don't want any part of. So keep an eye on Michael Carter's status as the week goes. And last but not least, Gus Edwards at Pittsburgh. Another tough matchup, but it just seems like when Gus Edwards is completely healthy, maybe they kind of took a little bit off of him last week because he was still kind of banged up. And they let Kenyon Drake have a few more touches than him, but we've seen Gus Edwards be very productive in the past in this offense. And I feel like if he's completely healthy, he's going to be productive again, especially with Lamar Jackson out. I think they lean on the running game a lot more this week. And that's going to round out my running backs. We're going to move straight on into our wide receivers for this week. And my number 1 at wide receiver is going to be Corey Davis, playing at Buffalo. Corey Davis, 10 targets on the field for, I believe it was 80% of the snaps this past week. Let me verify that for you. Let's see. Yep, 81% of the snaps this week. I mean, what else do you need? You got a wide receiver that's got targeted 10 times in an offense that's moving the ball, and he's not going to get the number 1 cover corner. That's going to be Garrett Wilson. So he's going to have the number 2 cornerback on him. And they're going to have to throw the ball to beat Buffalo if they want to beat Buffalo, because we know Buffalo is going to score the ball. So I like Corey Davis a lot from here on out, honestly, as long as Mike White is under center for the Jets. Number 2, Darius Slayton, still getting it done in a wide receiver starved offense. He seems to be the guy, 8 targets this week. He is a big play waiting to happen, and Daniel Jones is not afraid to chunk the ball down the field to him. So anytime he's in your lineup, he could be that very boom or bust player, but he seems to have a fairly safe floor with his targets right now, as they do not have enough wide receivers in that offense. Tough matchup at home against Philadelphia, but all he needs is one big play for you in fantasy, and that can put up enough points to be a solid wide receiver 2 for you. Not to mention it's a division game, and some players show up more for division big time games than others. Number 3 for me is going to be Isaiah McKenzie. Excuse me. And kind of a tough matchup for him against the Jets, who has a solid secondary. Excuse me, against the Jets, who has a solid secondary, but you're going to have Diggs that's going to get Sauce Gardner. Then you're going to have Gabe Davis get their number 2 corner, who's not bad, one of the best quarterback duos in the league. Then you're going to have Isaiah McKenzie get the number 3 corner. So whoever that number 3 corner is going to have to deal with Isaiah McKenzie. And we've already seen Josh Allen go to Isaiah McKenzie a lot in tough cornerback matchups. So I like him a fair amount this week at home against the Jets and really going forward. Moving on, number 4. This is kind of strange. My last 2 here are both on bye this week, but I think they could really help you out down the stretch if you don't need anybody this week. But Jahan Dotson came back, 9 targets this past week with Taylor Heineke in the helm, and then had a touchdown. So he's still being a red zone threat with Taylor Heineke, and he's just a big play waiting to happen every week. And he's going to get the number 2 corner with Terry McLaurin get the number 1 corner, who looked good. But I think that takes some pressure off Jahan Dotson, and I like him a lot for the rest of the season, because they're going to have to. I think they're an underrated team going forward. They're going to be in more games, and I think he's going to have a good chance to kind of break out at the end of the season after he's been injured for part of it. And then last but not least, definitely the wide receiver position, Alec Pierce, who actually outperformed Michael Pittman this past week on Sunday Night Football. And honestly, I mean, it's kind of a toss-up. We thought Paris Campbell was kind of, breaking out with Matt Ryan a little bit, but then Alec Pierce comes out of nowhere. He's a big red zone target. They're going to be, after the bye, they're going to be playing at Minnesota. And Minnesota, we know, is going to put up some points. So Indianapolis is going to be trying to keep up with them throwing the ball. So it's a really good matchup for him. I just like Alec Pierce the rest of the year. I think his talent is going to shine through their offensive woes as a team. So and that's going to round out my wide receivers. Moving on to tight end, a.k.a. lawn darts, because that's all you can do at tight end is just throw a dart up in the air and hope you land on a good tight end that can put you up some points. So this week, number one, I got to go with Greg Dulcich. He's kind of been boomer bust this year, but honestly, I think it has a lot to do with matchups. And he's got a plus matchup this week at home against Kansas City, who's not very good against the tight end. They lost Cortland Sutton. He got 8 targets last week, and they're going to have to throw the ball. So I like Greg Dulcich this week. Evan Ingram. I told you it's a good matchup. It was a fluke. The 3-target, 1-catch game. Had a good matchup last week. Put some points up with Trevor Lawrence. Actually giving him the ball. Let's see. He had 7 targets, 5 catches, 30 yards, a touchdown. I mean, that's like, let's see, that's, for tight end, that's number 4. Yeah, which is sad, but that's what it was number 4 tight end last week. So another plus matchup at Tennessee. And he's a red zone target for Trevor Lawrence, so that's what you look for. Number 3, this guy's coming back from an injury. He was really involved in the offense before the injury and before they lost a majority of their wide receivers. And that's Daniel Bellinger for the New York Giants. He came back last week, first game back off injury, and got 5 targets. He was really involved in the offense before. They were running jet run plays with their tight end to him, jet end arounds, whatever you want to call them. And they're starving for another solid pass catcher, and him and Daniel Jones have chemistry. So even though it's a tough matchup against at home against Philly, I still like Daniel Bellinger a fair amount. Number 4, still sticking with Tyler Conklin. Don't give up on him. It was a tough week, but he had 7 targets. Tight end is Buffalo's weakness, so it's not exactly a tough matchup for a tight end at Buffalo. And Mike White threw the ball to him 7 times, and they're going to have to throw the ball a lot more to beat Buffalo. So I like him a lot. And last but not least, kind of like wide receiver, this guy's on a bye, but he is starting to break out at the end of the year, and we just thought he was going to break out at the beginning of the season. So I like Cole Kmet coming off his bye. Chicago needs a pass catcher more than anybody right now, and he's on bye this week. But if you don't need somebody this week and can survive, I like Cole Kmet for the rest of the season after that. And moving on to quarterback position. Number 1 at quarterback for me this week is going to be Jared Goff at home versus Minnesota. Plus matchup. He looked good last week in another plus matchup at home. Going to be playing at home against Minnesota. Should be another shootout. All his weapons are getting healthy, as we've seen with DeAndre Swift kind of coming out the gate and overtaking the number 1 running back position over Jamal Williams this past week, which is always good for a quarterback because DeAndre Swift's one of the best pass-catching running backs in the league and always helps his quarterback out if he is out there and healthy. So like Jared Goff a lot this week. Number 2 for me is going to be Mac Jones. A little bit of a surprise, but he's playing at Arizona. So in the dome, don't have to worry about the weather, especially this time of the year. And he's coming off back-to-back 20-plus point games, and they're going to have to throw the ball. Their defense is good, but I think they're going to have to throw the ball against Arizona's very poor secondary to move the ball efficiently because their front 7 are pretty proficient at stopping the run, and that's what New England normally leans on. So I expect lots of screen plays and short pass plays against a beat up Arizona secondary for Mac Jones. And then number 3, This is going to be a Lamar Jackson replacement right here. Tyler Huntley at Pittsburgh. Honestly, this is a coin flip. Tyler Huntley in the past, when he took over, he had a 40-point game and he had a couple duds. So could be a big game, could be not so big game. It's at Pittsburgh. Their defense is getting healthier, looking better, especially with TJ Watt back. But if you're, got one of these quarterbacks that was injured and you're, struggling or just don't have the availability in some of your leagues, I think you could do worse than picking up Tyler Huntley. He's got a good rushing floor. Not many great weapons around him, but some. But he has a really good coach. He's got Mark Andrews, not many playmakers. Demarcus Robinson's looked better of late at wide receiver. Devin Duvernay's kind of that multi-tool back. And then he's got several running backs, but he's got a pretty good offensive line in front of him. So you could probably do worse than starting Tyler Huntley at Pittsburgh. Number 4, going to be the White Knight, Mike White. That's right. Say that 4 times fast. Mike White at Buffalo, 25th. They're 25th against the quarterback. Sorry, not 25th against the quarterback. He's got plenty of playmakers. He's playing at Buffalo, which is going to be tough, but he's looked very good in his game so far this year. So I like Mike White, even though, because he's going to have to pass the ball a fair amount to beat Buffalo. And I think he's got a good chance to do that. Buffalo's 9th against the quarterback. It's going to be probably some rough weather, but hey, there's always that chance they have to move the game if it's kind of crazy weather like they've shown they will do in the past. So I like Mike White this week at number 4. And then last but certainly not least, Deshaun Watson at number 5. He did not look that great in his debut. I hope you did not have high expectations and go in there starting him. Because this is the first time he's played in an NFL game since 2020. I think it was around week 13 or 15 of 2020, somewhere in there. So this week, tough matchup at Cincinnati, but I would give him some time to get game shape physically and mentally. But I think when he does, he has the weapons around him there in Cleveland to be a very productive quarterback down the stretch, especially with as many quarterbacks as we've lost this season. I don't think you can give up on him yet. If you have that bench spot to stash him until he starts looking like the Deshaun Watson of old, I would do that. But as of right now, I think you got to sit him, but I think he's too valuable down the stretch in the playoffs to be sitting on the waiver wire. And that's going to round out my quarterbacks. We're going to move on to our DST starts this week. These are just some streaming starts. There's 6 teams on a bye and some pretty solid defenses on a bye this week. But coming in at number 1 for me to stream this week is going to be the Las Vegas Raiders. That is correct. Never thought I would say that this year, but it's going to be the Raiders playing at the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday Night Football. Now, if you've listened to this pod before, you know I can't stand Thursday night football streamers, but that is offensively because it seems like offenses just tend to struggle on short weeks. This is going to be another short week for the already beat-up Rams, and the Rams are 30th for DST, which is good for the Las Vegas Raiders because 30th means they're giving up the second most points to defenses in the NFL. And they're also probably going to be starting their 3rd string quarterback because it was reported that John Wolford, who their 2nd string quarterback behind Matthew Stafford, who was placed on IR, John Wolford has a neck injury. So if he plays, he's going to be limited. Otherwise, they might be starting a 3rd string quarterback or just starting some young kid that walked in off the street and said, hey, I want to play quarterback. Sean McVay said, let's get you in there. So either way, Las Vegas looks like they got a good chance to be going up against a terrible offense that has their 3rd string quarterback on Thursday Night Football. And honestly, the last couple weeks, Las Vegas's defense has been fairly serviceable. Let's see, last week they put up 9 points against the Chargers. Week before, 9 points against Seattle. And then week before that, 10 points against Denver. And when you got 6 teams on a bye, and if you can get 10 points out of your defense, I mean, that's definitely all you can really ask for. And I think this is a good chance for them to do that and possibly, maybe give them a chance for a touchdown if they get an interception for a touchdown against a third string quarterback. So I like Las Vegas Raiders at the Los Angeles Rams. My number one DST. Number two, it's going to be another poor defense this year, but they're playing against, to me, a poorer offense, and that's Kansas City's defense at Denver. We all know Denver is extremely cold and not the best weather for a conducive offensive game this time of the year. And also, Denver's offense is 28th against DST. Their offense is riddled with injuries. We've seen their running back room with, Javonte Williams going down. They let Melvin Gordon go. Mike Boone's been banged up. They got Latavius Murray, who's older. He's had a couple games, so he's probably not going to be as fresh as he was whenever he first came in at running back. Russell Wilson struggled. Cortland Sutton went down with a hamstring injury. KJ Hamler got put on IR with a hamstring injury. They are very starved at position players that can, thrive with the ball in their hands. And Kansas City's defense has looked a little bit better of late. Their offense has played, lights out pretty much all year. But the last couple weeks, last week at Cincinnati, which is a very tough matchup, not as much. But the week before that, Rams, 16 points, which I would compare Denver's offense to the Rams very comparably. But 16 points that week. And then week before that at the Chargers, 10 points. And week before that, at home against Jacksonville, 8 points. Week before that, at home against Tennessee, 10 points. So they've kind of picked up their defensive production the last couple of weeks, and this is a really good matchup for them at Denver. So I like Kansas City at Denver, my number two. And last but not least, this is kind of a coin flip because I think it could go either way. It really depends on how Tyler Huntley plays and if Lamar Jackson's out. But I like Pittsburgh's defense, who's playing better as of late at home against Baltimore. Pittsburgh is a terribly hard place to play this time of the year. But Tyler Huntley has come in and been a serviceable quarterback and really can be a force on offense with his legs and his arm. The only thing is, we've talked before, Baltimore doesn't have a lot of big-time playmakers other than Mark Andrews on offense. And with Lamar Jackson out, they might lean more on the run, which could shorten the game, which is better for a defense. Not to mention Pittsburgh can be kind of tough weather this time of the year also, being real cold, real windy, probably lean more on a running game. Pittsburgh's offense is going to try to shorten the game as well. So I don't think this is going to be a shootout, unlike Baltimore's offense has been most of the year. So I think Pittsburgh playing at Baltimore, that's if there's no Lamar for sure. If Lamar Jackson plays, I definitely would not start Pittsburgh's defense. But I feel like with him being labeled week to week, there's a good chance he's not going to play. So I think you can roll the dice with Pittsburgh's defense against Baltimore at home. And I think they're going to force Huntley to throw to not more, and because they're going to lean on the run, I think Pittsburgh's going to stack the box, try to force Huntley to throw the ball, and if they can capitalize on some mistakes on Huntley, that could be great for their defense. And that's going to round out my streaming DSTs for this week. And then we're going to move right on our last, but certainly not least, and could be your most important player this week. It has been for me in several leagues, especially if you start Greg Zuerlein, who's the number one kicker this past week, like I told you to. He had 19 points this past week, and that can definitely make or break you if you're looking, to get in the playoffs, or you're looking to stay in first or second place if you have buys in your playoffs. That could have been clutch for you this past week. I've got 4 guys for you this week that I think will do well. With 6 teams on a bye, it limits the kickers a lot. I try to stay away from bad weather matchups and keep kickers in the dome this time of the year on offensive friendly teams. But going into our kickers, number one for me is going to be Michael Badgley. That's for Detroit. He's playing at home in a dome for Detroit, who's just coming off a 40-point game, playing at home against Minnesota, who has been scoring the ball. They scored 27 points this past week. I pretty much expect an offensive explosion in a dome at Detroit. Detroit moves the ball well, so they're going to get him in field goal range fairly often. Minnesota's front seven does do a fairly decent job at stopping the run. Not so good against the pass, but it's stopping the run. And sometimes that leads to quick 3 and outs, and if they're already in field goal position, then that's going to be a lot of opportunities for Michael Badgley. So I like him a lot this week. Number 2 is going to be Matthew Wright for me. This is one of those, it's not going to be the best weather probably because it's going to be in Pittsburgh, but he's a hot kicker right now. I mean, we're coming off 3 weeks ago, he had 13 points. Week before last, he had 13 points. And then this past week, he had 16 points for Pittsburgh. So he's kicking the ball a lot. And Pittsburgh, Mike Tomlin's one of those guys not afraid to let his kicker go out there and give it a shot and kick a field goal instead of going for it in that kind of no man's land. And you always want that in a head coach. And they're playing against Baltimore, who's a better defense. Like I was saying just a couple minutes ago, I expect a lot of running in this game, and typically that leads to more field goals than it does touchdowns. So I like Matthew Wright as number 2. Number 3, not the best. He's been up and down a lot this year. I really thought he'd have a better year playing for this team, but that's going to be Greg Joseph from Minnesota. We just talked about, I expect a shootout. Greg Joseph, and it's in a dome. So if you're going to have a shootout, you want one of the kickers on both teams, and Greg Joseph for Minnesota at Detroit in the dome. Lots of scoring. I think you could do worse than picking him up, especially with 6 teams on bye. And then last but certainly not least, it's going to be Jason Myers at Los Angeles. I'm sorry, not at Los Angeles. That was from last week. Hang on. But yeah, it's going to be Jason Myers. He's going to be at home against Carolina. Sorry about that. I lost that. But anyway, Jason Myers at home against Carolina. He's been a solid kicker all year. Pete Carroll's another one of those coaches that would rather kick the field goal than roll the dice, especially in key games where they're trying to jockey for playoff position. He's had several back-to-back 10-point weeks. Carolina has been struggling as a team in general as of late, and I think you could do worse than picking up Jason Myers and starting him at home against Carolina. So, and that's going to round out our kickers and round out our pod in general. This is the clutch times where you're trying to either get in the playoffs or jockey for playoff position. And even if you're not, don't be one of those Joe Blow guys that just quits on your team and quits on your league right at the end of the year because you're going to miss the playoffs, because that's no fun for everybody. Because there might be somebody in your league that's counting on you. At least fill your lineup with your best projected points players, even if you don't want to put thought into where they're playing or who they're playing against or their matchups. Just put guys in your lineup. Don't be one of those, I'm just going to go ahead and call it what it is, one of those douchebags that just leaves guys on bye in their lineup because you don't care anymore, because that's just no fun for anybody, especially the other people in your league that might be counting on you putting in a lineup. So don't be that guy. But anyway, we appreciate everybody that's listening. Please like, subscribe, follow, and download podcast, and give us some feedback, whatever you want to hear, whatever you don't want to hear. And we appreciate everybody out there that's been listening. And good luck at everything. And we'll come back at you with starts at sleepers later on in the week. And good luck going into week 14. Y'all have a good week.